The 393rd meeting of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People is called to order. Pursuant to the relevant provisions of Resolution 32/40B of the General Assembly of the 2nd of December 1977, we are today meeting for a special meeting, as in the past, to celebrate the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. On behalf of the committee, at the outset, I should like to hail the presence among us of senior officials from our organization. In particular, Her Excellency Madam Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garces, the President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Ma Zhaoshu, the President of the Security Council, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ms. Maria Luisa Ribeiro Viotti, his Chef de Cabinet, His Excellency Mr. Shahrul Ikram Yaakob, the Permanent Representative of Malaysia to the United Nations Organization, and the Vice Chair of the Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices affecting the human rights of the Palestinian people and other Arabs in the occupied territories. His Excellency Mr. Riyad Mansour, the Permanent Observer of the State of Palestine to the United Nations, and the representative of the Palestinian President, His Excellency Mahmoud Abbas, for this current meeting. Mr. Miroslav Yencha, the Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs, and I would also like to warmly welcome you, colleagues, the representatives of the member states and intergovernmental organizations, and also all of our guests, in particular from civil society, who have kindly responded to the invitation of the committee. I wish to mention in particular Mr. Mark Lamont Hill, who is an American citizen, a campaigner, an academic, journalist, and political commentator on CNN, who kindly agreed to deliver a message on behalf of civil society. Mr. Hill will speak during the second part of our meeting, and he is the personification of the saying of Corneille, who said that, "In souls nobly born, valor does not depend on age." That said, before giving the floor to different speakers, I wish to make a statement as the chair of the committee. On behalf of the United Nations Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, I wish to warmly thank you for your presence at this ceremony this morning. The fact that you are here is demonstration of the international community's commitment to finding a solution to the Palestinian issue. We are meeting once again to mark our solidarity with the Palestinian people. And on this International Day, what comes to mind for me is the adoption exactly 71 years ago, on the 29th of November 1947, by the UN General Assembly of Resolution 181 on the partition of Mandate Palestine into two sovereign and neighbouring states. The State of Israel indeed did obtain its independence and was admitted as a full member to the United Nations. However, the State of Palestine achieved neither independence nor sovereignty and remains pigeonholed into the status of an observer state to our organization. To date, 139 members have officially recognized the State of Palestine. However, the illegal occupation of its territory has persisted for 51 years now, and the Palestinian people are still pursuing their objective of recovering their inalienable rights, including the right to self-determination. Ladies and gentlemen, in the West Bank, as in Jerusalem, the expansion of settlements has continued apace in violation of international law and the relevant resolutions of the Security Council, in particular Resolutions 2334 of 2016. There's also been the demolition of infrastructure, of houses and other structures that belong to Palestinians, as well as of entire villages, such as the Bedouin hamlet of Khan el-Ahmar. People have been threatened with displacement, which has also compromised the means of subsistence of the inhabitants. Restrictions on freedom of movement and the wall itself are also other impediments to daily life for millions of Palestinians. This is also true of the disproportionate use of force against civilian population, who continue to be the victims, and among them, children are also victims. In the Gaza Strip, the illegal blockade, which has lasted 11 years now, continues to isolate civilians and to inflict on them all kinds of tribulations, which exacerbate their despair and the tensions. Ladies and gentlemen, this committee calls on stakeholders to undertake the appropriate measures without delay to mitigate the disastrous humanitarian situation in Gaza, to return the dignity to the civilian population. What is also important is the respect of the ceasefire by all parties, in particular by Israel and Hamas. The committee, in this regard, hails the joint efforts of the United Nations and of Egypt in attempting to re-establish calm on the ground and to promote reconciliation between Palestinian political stakeholders. Furthermore, it reiterates its firm condemnation of any incitement to hatred, of any provocation and any violence, and encourages all parties to exercise the greatest restraint. There is also a deficit in the budget for dealing with humanitarian needs and development, and this causes great concern to the members of the committee. Specifically, there has been a drastic reduction in the resources of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA. This jeopardizes programs that are essential for some 5.3 million Palestinian refugees in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and in the occupied Palestinian territories. The committee wishes to reiterate its gratitude to all member states who have reinforced their support for UNRWA, and the committee in doing so echoes the Secretary-General in calling for efforts to increase so that the office has sufficient, predictable and sustainable financing that will allow it to continue its mandate for Palestinian refugees and at the same time to contribute to stability in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, to achieve the independence of a sovereign state, the Palestinian people need credible political prospects, stipulating reconciliation that should lead to a real climate of peace and development in the respect of the relevant resolutions of the United Nations and the Arab Peace Initiative. The illegal occupation has been qualified by some specialists as an annexation. It is rampant, and the blockade of the Gaza Strip have caused a climate of mistrust between Israelis and Palestinians that has further retarded the achievement of a fair and sustainable solution, by which I mean two states living side by side in peace and security within the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Palestine. The United Nations has the primordial responsibility on the Palestinian issue. It is therefore incumbent on us as stakeholders in the international community, in particular the Security Council, the Peace Quartet, the Middle East Peace Quartet, to support the parties so that they can achieve a two-state solution that respects dignity and the fundamental rights of Israelis and Palestinians. In doing this, we would guarantee the peaceful coexistence and harmony of the three monotheistic religions, respecting the holy places of Jerusalem, pursuant to their historic status quo. Beyond these two neighbouring states, peace, security and prosperity would also benefit the whole region, which has gone through so much. Ladies and gentlemen, the 10th of December next will mark the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the General Assembly in its third session. The adoption of this founding text, which enshrines the principles outlined in the United Nations Charter, came a year after the adoption of Resolution 181. Nonetheless, the Palestinian people are still trying to achieve their inalienable rights and the promise of an independent and sovereign state. That's the promise that's outlined in this founding text. In the face of this conclusion, we have no alternative but to discharge our historic duty to allow the Palestinian people, like the Israeli people, to take their rightful place among the community of nations. For its part, the committee will continue to commit within the mandate given to it by the General Assembly to keeping the issue of Palestine on the international agenda until Palestinians can fully exercise their inalienable rights, including the right to self-determination and to independence. I thank you. This is the end of my statement. I now have the honour and the pleasure of giving the floor to the President of the General Assembly, Her Excellency Ms. Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garcés. You have the floor.
Your Excellency Sheikh Nion, Permanent Representative of Senegal and Chair of the Committee of the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, Your Excellency Riyad Mansour, Permanent Observer of the State of Palestine to the United Nations, Your Excellency Ma Xiaoshu, Permanent Representative of China and President of the Security Council, Mr. Secretary General, Madame Chef de Cabinet of the Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here today in this very special moment. We mark the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people at a time when the need for such solidarity has never been greater. I would like to start by thanking the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People for their leadership in organizing this event. When I consider the concept of solidarity, I am immediately drawn to the theme of the 73rd session of the General Assembly, making the United Nations relevant to all. I would like to emphasize this point, relevant to all. Our solidarity with the Palestinian people must not be rooted just in sympathy. As worthy as that is, the Palestinian people are entitled to more than that. As we seek to respond to the needs of people everywhere in order not to leave anyone behind, we owe to the Palestinian people an obligation to do everything in our power to end their current nightmare. As we stand with the Palestinian people on this day, we must use this opportunity to fight the increasing numbness that occurs when suffering and death becomes a daily reality and the media does not even report on them on the back pages. The state of Palestinian people remains a scar on our collective conscience, and we all have a responsibility to press the urgency of the need for expeditious resolution. I call on world leaders, including religious and other leaders, to make the Palestinian question a priority that deserves utmost attention. Because it is not enough to say that we stand with the people if we do not exercise the political will needed to make the stand count. Colleagues, I would like to note two areas of concern and one area of opportunity. My first concern relates to the ongoing humanitarian situation in Palestine. According to the Office of Humanitarian Affairs, 43% of the Palestinian population are refugees, and half of these are below the age of 18. Furthermore, food insecurity, a basic human right and one of the Sustainable Development Goals, afflicts 47% of the population of the Gaza Strip. Average water consumption, meanwhile, stands at 79 and 66 liters per person in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, respectively, well below the recommended ratio of 100 liters per person per day. And I could go on and on. If we are to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people, then we must address these challenges, even as we push for implementation of the two-state solution. We cannot leave an entire people and entire generations to suffer. This brings me to my second concern, that of funding and resources for UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East. Years of budget cuts have left the agency with a chronic shortfall, restricting their efforts to reach the Palestinian people. I would like to take this opportunity to thank those member states who stepped up and helped fill the gap. The $122 million that was received has prevented an immediate shutdown of key UNRWA services, including areas such as primary education and food security, and this is, of course, commendable. At the same time, this solution is not tenable. A long-term fix for the underfinancing of UNRWA and more support in general to the people of Palestine is necessary. Which brings me to my final point and a call to action. Colleagues, we need to accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in the occupied territories to improve the lives and livelihoods of the Palestinian people. With sufficient investment and with support from UNRWA and other UN and multilateral partners, we can help to empower women and girls, expand access to education, create jobs and livelihoods, and ensure access to affordable health care. These efforts not only directly benefit the people themselves, they can reduce exclusion and marginalization and further increase the prospects for the peace process. Dear friends, in the general debate of the General Assembly in September, world leaders declared their firm support to multilateralism and called for a strong United Nations. For the Palestinian people, the paralysis of the peace process may be seen as a reflection of the weak state of multilateralism and the delivery capacity of the United Nations. The only outlet to the Palestinian question is therefore to honor existing resolutions, to reboost dialogue and find a truly lasting political solution. Let us demonstrate our commitment to the Palestinian people by strengthening multilateralism and making the United Nations work for all people, for human rights, peace and security, and sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President of the General Assembly, Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garces, I'd like to thank you for your important statement, which reaffirms the commitment of the General Assembly under your leadership to a political solution to the Palestinian question and to face the challenges faced by the Middle East. I now have the pleasure of giving the floor to the President of the Security Council, His Excellency Mr. Ma Xiaoshu. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. President of the General Assembly, Ms. Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garces, Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Permanent Observer of the State of Palestine, Mr. Riyad Mansour, Your Excellencies, colleagues. I would like to thank the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People for inviting me in my capacity as President of the Security Council to address the special commemorative meeting in observance of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the conclusion of Oslo Accords, which remind us that a lasting solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict can only be achieved by peaceful means through dialogue and negotiations. Bearing in mind its relevant resolutions, the Council remains fully committed to a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East. Mr. Chairman, over the past year, the Security Council has remained seized of the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The Security Council received monthly briefings on the situation from the Secretary General's Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process and the Department of Political Affairs, and held open debates on a quarterly basis. Meetings were convened in response to the situation around the Gaza Strip. The Security Council also continued to receive the Secretary General's reports in briefings by the Special Coordinator every 3 months and received one in written form in June. The situation in the Middle East remains a concern for the Council. The Council members expressed concerns regarding the deterioration of the situation in the Gaza Strip, and call for increased international support to elevate its humanitarian and economic situation. The Council members condemn all violence and hostilities directed against civilians and all acts of terrorism. The Council members reiterate their call for the resumption of peace negotiations as soon as possible and for intensified efforts. Mr. Chairman, the Council, in conformity with the Charter of the United Nations, remains committed to the achievement of just, lasting, and peaceful solution in order to achieve peace and security that the Israeli and Palestinian people both need and deserve. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Je remercie Son Excellence.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Ma Xiaoshu, President of the Security Council, for his statement. I need not reaffirm the central role of the Security Council in the quest for a holistic political solution, which is holistic, just, and sustainable in the Middle East, which provides for two states living side by side in peace and security within safe and internationally recognized and guaranteed borders. It is now my privilege to call on the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, another indefatigable actor working towards a just solution to the Israeli-Palestinian dispute. You have the floor, sir.
Monsieur le Président, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. More than 40 years ago, the General Assembly established an International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people to remind us of our collective unfinished task of resolving the question of Palestine. Over the decades, this has become one of the most intractable challenges for the international community, and we know only too well the tragic results. Excellencies, demolitions, illegal continued settlement expansion and construction, forced evictions and collective punitive measures will not bring peace. The same goes for violence and incitement, and similarly, unilateral steps will not resolve final status issues of the conflict. Only constructive negotiations in good faith and adhering to the long-established and agreed parameters for a two-state solution will bring the desired, long-lasting solution. Containing the situation is not sufficient. I call on all actors, and first and foremost, the leadership of Israel and the Palestinian Authority, to take bold steps and restore faith in the promise of Resolution 181 of two states living side by side in peace and security, fulfilling the legitimate national aspirations of both peoples, with borders based on the 1967 lines and Jerusalem as the capital of both states, East Jerusalem being the capital of the Palestinian state. It's the only way to achieve the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. It's the only option for a comprehensive and just peace, and I call on the international community to intensify its engagements and reiterate its commitment to assist Palestinians and Israelis in reaching the two-state solution. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today, in particular, our hearts are heavy with the suffering of the people in Gaza. Approximately 2 million Palestinians remain locked in increasing poverty and unemployment, with limited access to adequate health, education, water, and electricity. Young people see little prospect of a better future. I urge Israel to lift the restrictions on the movement of people and goods, which also hamper the efforts of the United Nations and other humanitarian agencies without jeopardizing legitimate security concerns. And I call on Hamas and other militant groups to halt their military buildup in Gaza, including the indiscriminate launching of rockets and incendiary devices directed at Israel. The violence during demonstrations at the Gaza fence is a matter of great concern. Palestinians in Gaza have legitimate grievances and the right to demonstrate peacefully. Hamas and the leaders of the demonstrations have a responsibility to prevent violent actions and provocations. But for its part, Israel has a responsibility to exercise maximum restraint and to not use lethal force, except at the last resort against imminent threat of death or serious injury. I'm encouraged by the recent reduction of violence in Gaza. I commend the efforts of the government of Egypt and key regional and international partners, together with my special coordinator for the Middle East peace process, to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza, restore calm, and support inter-Palestinian reconciliation and the return of the legitimate Palestinian government in Gaza. Excellencies, the United Nations will not waver in its commitment to the Palestinian people. On this International Day of Solidarity, let us reaffirm our commitment to upholding the rights of the Palestinian people and to building a future of peace, justice, security and dignity for Palestinians and Israelis alike.
Au nom du comité,
On behalf of the committee, I extend sincere thanks to the Secretary General for his personal, tireless efforts and his efforts through all the structures under his authority, including the Division on the Rights of the Palestinian People, to arrive at a two-state solution based on long-standing parameters agreed upon by the international community. I would now like to turn to my friend and brother, His Excellency Mr. Riyad Mansour. He is the permanent observer of the State of Palestine to the United Nations, and call upon him to deliver a message on behalf of His Excellency Mahmoud Abbas, President of the State of Palestine. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have the honor to read to this August meeting the statement of His Excellency President Mahmoud Abbas. معالي السيد
His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Her Excellency Ms. Maria Fernandez Espinosa, President of the United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Mao Xiaoshu, President of the Security Council, His Excellency Mr. Sheikh Nyanga, Chair of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I convey greetings from the State of Palestine and the Palestinian people to all of our friends around the world joining in the commemoration of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. I reaffirm today our profound appreciation and gratitude to all countries extending invaluable support for the just cause of our people, including through their support to our annual resolutions on the question of Palestine at the United Nations, and the maintenance of their principled positions on the basis of international law and the relevant United Nations resolutions, despite all the pressures and attempts to undermine these legal and moral positions. We are grateful their unwavering support and efforts on this basis to end this injustice and to achieve lasting peace and security in our region and the world. The strength of your positions in these forums reinforces the resilience of the Palestinian people in Palestine and in exile, and gives them hope to continue their struggle to realize freedom and dignity. Today, we also renew our gratitude to non-governmental organizations and civil society, and to all our brothers, sisters, friends, and all freedom and peace-loving peoples around the world who continue their steadfast support for our people. We are grateful for their solidarity and support for the rights and legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people, aimed at the achievement of their freedom and independence and the realization of a just and lasting peace. The United Nations has rightly defended our cause, placing it as a priority on the agenda of the international community. The United Nations has extended a helping hand to our people and has legislated resolutions and recommendations that constitute the foundations that cannot be bypassed in the efforts to achieve a just, lasting, and comprehensive solution. We reaffirm here the permanent responsibility of the United Nations towards the question of Palestine, which must be upheld until this question is satisfactorily resolved in all its aspects. In this regard, we express our deep appreciation for the efforts exerted by the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, and the efforts exerted by the United Nations Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, and its chair, His Excellency Ambassador of Senegal, Mr. Sheikh Niang, and as well as the Bureau and all members and observers of the committee and the Division for Palestinian Rights of the Secretariat, and also to the many agencies assisting the Palestinian people in support of our rights and a just peace. The General Assembly, the Security Council, the Human Rights Council, and other United Nations organs and bodies, including the International Court of Justice, have adopted strong and principled resolutions in favor of our just cause. We must reiterate, however, our deep regret about the lack of implementation of these resolutions, which has compounded the conflict over the many decades and inflicted grave hardships on the Palestinian people, which continually deprived the people of exercising their rights. This unjust situation has deepened convictions that there is indeed a double standard when it comes to resolutions regarding Israel, as those resolutions are not being implemented and Israel is being allowed to continue behaving as though it is a state above the law, with complete immunity and grave consequences. On this day each year, we recall General Assembly Resolution 181 of November 29, 1947, by which the Assembly unfairly decided to partition Mandate Palestine without the consent of the Palestinian people, and which was adopted 30 years following the Balfour Declaration in 1917, in the aftermath of which the 1948 Nakba that befell the indigenous Palestinian people, forcibly uprooting them from their lands, dispossessing and dispersing them throughout the region. We recall also Israel's occupation of the rest of the Palestinian lands in 1967, comprised of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. Despite signing a peace accord with Israel in 1993, which stipulated that by 1999 all final status issues should be resolved and the independence of the State of Palestine on the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, should be achieved, living side by side with the State of Israel in security and good neighborliness. And despite the Palestinian Liberation Organization's recognition of the State of Israel in 1993, despite Palestine's fulfillment of its obligations under the agreements signed and the establishment of national institutions respecting the rule of law, and despite the recognition of Palestine as a state by 139 countries and the upgrading of its status to an observer state in 2012 at the United Nations, and its accession to more than 100 international treaties and organizations, and despite fostering a culture of peace and combating terrorism, Israel, the occupying power, still denies the Palestinian people their right to freedom and independence in their own land, and refuses to reciprocate recognition, and persists with its colonial schemes, with the theft of our land and transfer of its settlers in grave breach of the Geneva Conventions, the most recent of which have been plans to demolish the village of Khan al-Ahmar and imposition of the Jewish nation-state law. Against the backdrop of this prolonged injustice, the international community has sought to uphold its responsibilities towards the question of Palestine, including towards the Palestinian refugees, who now are nearly 6 million people, through the establishment of UNRWA, which plays a very vital role in accordance with Resolution 194. On this occasion, we renew our gratitude to those countries, extending their support to UNRWA and those who have pledged additional support following the recent punitive U.S. measures against UNRWA in an attempt to undermine the legitimate status and rights of Palestinian refugees. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, after more than half a century of the Israeli occupation, a horizon for peace remains absent as Israel persists with its military occupation of the Palestinian land and continues to impose a racist regime, an apartheid by which it continues to control the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, and prevents the Palestinian people from exercising their inalienable right to self-determination and does not implement all agreements it has signed. Here I must ask, until when will Israel be dealt with as a state above the law, and when will the international community uphold its obligations? In this regard, I must remind that we have not abdicated our obligations under the agreements signed with Israel, and we continue to extend our hands for the realization of a just peace based on UN resolutions and the two-state solution on the pre-1967 borders. I must remind that we have never rejected negotiations and that we have presented our peace initiative to the Security Council last February, and we remain committed to the objectives and ideals of peace and tolerance. And we work to combat terrorism in our region and globally. We also remain committed to ensuring that the capital of our state, East Jerusalem, will be open for all believers and all faithful of the monotheistic religions. At the same time, we will continue our efforts to unify our land and our people and to achieve reconciliation through Egyptian mediation and to restore the national consensus government, control and functions in the Gaza Strip as in the West Bank with one law, one government, and one legitimate security force. As we face this dangerous political deadlock, I call upon the international community to uphold its obligations and responsibilities and not permit the continued violation of international law. At the same time, we call on all states that believe in the two-state solution and recognize the state of Israel to recognize the state of Palestine as well. This recognition will help reinforce justice and give our people hope until the day they realize their long overdue freedom and independence. We appeal to you to uphold your obligations not to recognize the illegal situation created by Israel's policies and measures in the occupied state of Palestine, including East Jerusalem. We also appeal to you not to provide support and assistance to Israel in entrenching and perpetuating this illegal situation and to distinguish between the territory of the occupying power and the occupied territory in order to ensure accountability and to contribute to ending this unjust situation. We remain fully committed to international law, the relevant UN resolutions, and the two-state solution on the pre-1967 borders, and remain ready to give every opportunity to regional and international efforts based on long-standing terms of reference to achieve a just peace. But if efforts fail to achieve such solution, the Palestinian people will not disappear, nor will they accept oppression and injustice as their fate. Our people will continue their legitimate struggle for the realization of their inalienable rights and will strive for equal rights for all in historic Palestine without discrimination. On this occasion, we reaffirm once again that our struggle is not directed against Judaism as a religion, because we respect all religions, but rather is against the colonial occupation of our land and people, and the denial of our inalienable rights, including the right to self-determination. Despite decades of disappointment, we maintain our conviction in the rule of law and international institutions. The State of Palestine will continue to engage in all efforts to further strengthen the rule of international law, including the strengthening of its institutions and the empowerment of its people, especially women and youth. Respect for international law is the cornerstone of peace. But neither respect nor peace can be achieved through speeches alone. Words and commitments must be matched by practical actions to implement the law. On this day of international solidarity with the Palestinian people, we stress that this is a pressing issue and urge that no effort be spared to achieve a peaceful settlement to the question of Palestine. We remain grateful to all those who resolutely defend international law, the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, and the goal of peace. We await the day when we together may celebrate the freedom of our people in the independent state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital, and welcome all of you in the city of Jerusalem, whose original name is the City of Peace. Thank you. The President's statement has ended.
President Mahmoud Abbas, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Ambassador
Riyad Mansour, I'd like to thank you for that very poignant message, and may I also ask you to be, on behalf of us, convey our sincere greetings and our thanks to President Mahmoud Abbas, and also our thanks to the Palestinian people, and be assured that the committee is resolute within its mandate conferred by the General Assembly to continue to promote the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including the right to self-determination and the right to an independent Palestinian state. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to reiterate our gratitude to all the dignitaries present at this morning's ceremony, and I'd also like to thank them for their resounding messages of solidarity addressed to the Palestinian people. May I now suspend the meeting briefly to allow some of our special guests to take their leave.
Welcome back to New York.
La séance est...
We will now resume our meeting. I would now like to give the floor to my friend, His Excellency Mr. Shahrul Ikram Yaqub, the permanent representative of Malaysia to the United Nations and the Vice Chair of the Special Committee investigating Israeli practices affecting human rights of the Palestinian people and the other Arabs in the occupied territories. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to address this special meeting to commemorate the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people on behalf of Dr. Rohan Pereira, Permanent Representative of Sri Lanka and Chair of the Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices affecting the human rights of the Palestinian people and other Arabs of the occupied territories. May I take this opportunity to thank Mr. Sheikh Niang, Permanent Representative of Senegal and Chairman of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People for the kind invitation extended to the Special Committee to address this special meeting of the Committee in observance of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. Mr. Chairman, tomorrow, 29th November 2018, will mark the 71st anniversary of the adoption of Resolution 181 by the United Nations General Assembly and will be the 40th anniversary of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. Both are stark and painful reminders that the urgent need to find a just and peaceful solution to the question of Palestine continues to elude us. In July this year, the Special Committee visited Amman and met with Palestinian and Israeli civil society representatives, victims and witnesses, as well as Palestinian authorities and UN officials who briefed the Special Committee on the deteriorating situation of human rights within the occupied Palestinian territories and the occupied Syrian Golan. These briefings and testimonies have brought to the attention of the Special Committee the daily cycle of violence and hardships that the Palestinian people suffer, whose every aspect of life continues to be impacted by the unlawful occupation. 2 weeks ago, the Special Committee presented its 50th report pursuant to General Assembly Resolution 72/84. The Special Committee remains concerned about the continued expansion of Israeli settlements in the occupied territories, the blockade and closure of Gaza, the lack of accountability, the detention of children and the use of administrative detention, and the hostile environment faced by civil society, particularly local Palestinian and Israeli organizations working to promote human rights in the occupied territories. Mr. Chairman, settlement expansion and the demolition of Palestinian homes and destruction of their private properties was one of the most frequently cited issues of concern during the meeting the Special Committee had, that has resulted in displacement of almost 600 Palestinian people in a one-year period, of whom half are reported to be children. This also has a direct impact on the escalation of violence in the occupied territories and has contributed to the increase in the number of civilian casualties, including children. The Special Committee was also informed that demolitions largely carried out on the pretext of lack of building permits were also carried out for punitive reasons. Property provided by humanitarian assistance, such as classrooms for a Bedouin community, has also been demolished. Mr. Chairperson, the report this year also covers the situation in Gaza, where the Special Committee is concerned about the excessive use of force by Israeli security forces against demonstrators since the end of March. That continues to date. As of 31st October, the Special Committee was informed that 228 Palestinians have been killed, including 43 children, and over 24,362 have been injured. The Special Committee strongly condemns the excessive use of force by Israeli security forces. The blockade and closure of Gaza that enters its 12th year remains the most significant obstacle to sustainable recovery and economic development. It has a significant negative impact on the most basic human rights of Gazans, including their rights to health, education, and freedom of movement. The Special Committee heard with concern the restrictions on imports to Gaza and the current electricity crisis. These have severely threatened critical hospital and health clinics, water and sanitation infrastructure and services that has to provide for nearly 2 million Palestinians resident in Gaza, of which over half are children. This situation is further exacerbated by UNRWA's unprecedented funding crisis. We wish to acknowledge the deep appreciation of the work done by UNRWA to continue programs such as food security support for refugees, despite having to scale down some emergency programs. The work of UNRWA needs the continuing support and engagement of states through adequate and predictable resources to ensure they can effectively discharge their invaluable mandate. Mr. Chairman, the testimonies heard by the Special Committee this year indicate that Israeli discriminatory practices are increasing, resulting in a rapid deterioration of the human rights and humanitarian situation in the occupied territories. The Special Committee expresses serious concern at the use of arbitrary administrative detention, where detainees are held without trial or charges on indefinitely renewable orders for several months. Of particular concern were reports that arrests of children were on the rise. The Special Committee has once again heard about the difficulties faced by human rights defenders, journalists, and civil society organizations working on human rights issues related to the occupation. The Special Committee underscores the urgent need of reviving the peace process and reiterates support for the two-state solution and joins international calls for a just and lasting solution to the question of Palestine and an end to the suffering of the Palestinian people. All parties to the conflict are urged to create the necessary environment to facilitate peace and for mutual confidence-building measures to support efforts to resume dialogue and substantive negotiations. Israel must protect the Palestinian civilian population in the occupied territories and desist from actions that are contrary to the established rules of international law and practice. We reiterate our support for Security Council Resolutions 242 and 497 and the end of occupations of the occupied territories, the ceasing of all settlement activities, and the implementation of all other UN General Assembly resolutions regarding the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to statehood and the attainment of a two-state solution based on 1967 borders. The solidarity of spirit today with the Palestinian people demonstrate that the global community supports a negotiated settlement that would lead to peace. We hope that this solidarity and spirit of goodwill will assist the people of Palestine to work together to preserve national unity as they strive towards a peace settlement for the creation of a fully sovereign and independent Palestine. We are heartened that despite the decades of struggle and immense difficulties that the Palestinian people have had to endure, their resolute spirit and strength of purpose to gain their legitimate rights have prevailed. We take this opportunity to stand united with the Palestinian people and reaffirm our commitment and steadfast support for the Palestinian cause as they strive to gain their legitimate rights and aspirations. On the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, let the resilience and endurance of the people of Palestine inspire us all to rededicate our collective efforts to forge a peaceful settlement of the question on Palestine. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Je vous remercie.
I thank you, Ambassador Jacob, and also through you, your country, for its commitment to promoting the defense of the Palestinian cause. We greatly esteem the contribution that the Special Committee continues to make. Besides your country, that committee also includes mine, Senegal, and Sri Lanka is the chair of the committee. I now have the pleasure of giving the floor to Mr. Henry Suarez, the Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, who will deliver a statement on behalf of His Excellency Mr. Nicolas Maduro, the President of Venezuela, on behalf of the non-aligned movement. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It is an honor for the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to take the floor on behalf of the 120 member states comprising the non-aligned movement during this solemn meeting in observance of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. At the outset, we would like to express, on behalf of the member states of the movement, our deep appreciation to the President of the General Assembly for convening this special meeting. We also thank the Secretary General of the United Nations and the President of the Security Council for their participation in this solemn observance and their important remarks. Today, we wish also to renew our appreciation to the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People for its important work in promoting the just cause and rights of the Palestinian people, and to the Division for Palestinian Rights of the Secretariat of the United Nations for its much valuable assistance and support. Similarly, the movement reaffirms its sincere appreciation to the Commissioner General and the entire staff of UNRWA for all of their very valuable efforts in adverse conditions in helping to alleviate the suffering and to address the plight and needs of the Palestine refugees, as well as to all of the United Nations agencies with special programs providing vital assistance and support to the Palestinian people in line with their permanent responsibility, the permanent responsibility of the United Nations, rather, and the international community regarding the question of Palestine until a just, lasting, comprehensive, and peaceful solution is achieved. Mr. President, the non-aligned movement fully supports the observance of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, as it serves as a signal occasion for reflecting on the continuing injustice and dire situation being endured by the Palestinian people over the decades in the occupied Palestinian territory. And this includes East Jerusalem and the blockaded Gaza Strip due to the continuing denial of their inalienable rights by Israel, the occupying power. After more than half a century of foreign occupation that has subjected the Palestinian people to gross and systematic human rights violations and untold pain and suffering, and 71 years since the General Assembly decision to partition Mandate Palestine and the ensuing Nakba, which we must recall what it is and its human dimension, the catastrophe and tragedy that befell the Palestinian people in 1948, by which they lost their homeland and by which the majority of Palestinians were forcibly uprooted from their homes and both displaced and dispossessed, becoming refugees whose plight continues until this day. It is clear that the Palestinian question lies at the heart of and is among the root causes of so many of the other crises and dilemmas we witness today in the Middle East. This International Day of Solidarity thus provides an opportunity for renewing our shared commitment to a just and lasting solution for the question of Palestine and ultimately to lasting peace in the Middle East as a whole. It is also our heartfelt hope that one day this solidarity and support will translate into genuine change for the Palestinian people and the ultimate goal of peace. In the interconnected world we live in today, in which we face multiple, complex, and newly emerging threats and challenges to international peace and security, we believe that multilateralism has become much more relevant and essential than ever before. The situation in the Middle East, including the question of Palestine, is one that must be resolved through a multilateral process and diplomatic efforts within the framework of international law and relevant resolutions and through peaceful means. We're all aware that therein lies the situation. In this vein, allow us to stress from the outset that it is imperative that collective action be taken immediately to redress the situation on the ground, de-escalate tensions, and foster a conducive environment for the pursuit of peace, including by averting unilateral, provocative, or arbitrary measures that only serve to embolden Israel to further pursue its illegal policies and practices in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem. Mr. President, from the very establishment of the United Nations, the question of Palestine has been on its agenda. Over 7 decades have passed, and yet the Palestinian people continue to be deprived of their inalienable rights, including their right to self-determination and freedom. They are still counting on the effective contribution of the United Nations in accordance with international law and the relevant resolutions for fulfilling their aspirations of achieving the independence and sovereignty of the State of Palestine. Despite decades of their participation in peace efforts in good faith, despite their proven commitment to the two-state solution for peace, despite their adherence to international law, and despite the painful compromises made, the Palestinians' plight has worsened on all fronts, and the situation on the ground is dramatically deteriorating due to Israel's persistent illegal policies and practices, which have further destabilized and exacerbated the situation on the ground, undermined all peace efforts, and obstructed justice over these many years, holding hostage the lives and future of generations of Palestinians. As the Security Council remains silent and paralyzed on this issue, in spite of its duties enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, the international community continues to witness in horror Israel's brutal military occupation in all its manifestations in breach of international law and the relevant resolutions of both the General Assembly and the Security Council. Under the umbrella of this unjust occupation, the occupying power continues its oppression and collective punishment of the defenseless and innocent Palestinian people and continues to perpetrate grave human rights violations and reported war crimes. This includes, inter alia, the use of military force against civilians leading to death and injury, including among children, the colonization of Palestinian land through the confiscation of land, demolition of homes, construction of settlements and the wall, exploitation of natural resources, and the transfer of hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers to the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. The unlawful detention and imprisonment and administrative detention of thousands of Palestinian civilians, including children and women, and the inhumane and illegal blockade being imposed on the Gaza Strip for 11 years now. In light of this continuing illegal and unjust situation, the non-aligned movement also calls once again for measures to be taken in accordance with international law to remedy the violation of the human rights of the Palestinians, including through the provision of protection to the Palestinian people for as long as this occupation continues. Mr. President, the non-aligned movement condemns Israel's continuing military occupation of the Palestinian territory in breach of international law and UN resolutions. In this regard, we further condemn the illegal Israeli settlement activities by which the occupying power has continued to colonize the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and to forcibly displace Palestinian civilians in grave breach of international law and Security Council Resolution 2334. We also condemn the provocations and incitement by groups of extremist settlers, including against the holy sites in occupied East Jerusalem, including Al-Haram and Al-Sharif, and the vandalization of mosques and churches, which are fueling tensions and religious sensitivities that risk further destabilization on the ground. Consequently, we demand that Israel, the occupying power, immediately cease all such violations of international law, including international humanitarian and human rights law, and fully abide by its legal obligations, including under the Fourth Geneva Convention, and that it respect the sanctity of holy sites and the historic status quo in place for decades now. Israel must cease all attempts and measures aimed at altering the demographic composition, legal status, character, and geographic nature of the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and facilitating the de facto annexation of more Palestinian land. All such measures have been deemed to be illegal by the Security Council as well as by the International Court of Justice and are grossly violating the human rights of the Palestinian people and undermining the realization of just and lasting peace on the basis of the two-state solution on pre-1967 borders, the viability of which the occupying power is destroying on a daily basis. Mr. President, the non-aligned movement also demands once again the full and immediate lifting and ending of the illegal blockade of the Gaza Strip by Israel, which continues to severely impair all aspects of life of the Palestinian civilian population in Gaza, and it constitutes a massive collective punishment. This inhumane blockade continues to impede the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip from the devastation inflicted by the Israeli occupying forces in 2014, and it obstructs economic recovery and development due to lack of sustained and regular movement of persons and goods between the Strip and the outside world, including the link, unity, and movement between Gaza and the West Bank. The member states of the movement are of the view that a real change in the situation on the ground requires an end to all of the occupation's illegal measures and their reversal towards bringing this occupation to an end. It is unacceptable that Israel, the occupying power, continues to pursue all the above-mentioned illegal and deplorable activities with blatant impunity, despite the prohibitions of such actions under international law. Intensified, coordinated efforts, including measures of accountability, must be undertaken by the international community to compel Israel to immediately cease all of its illegal policies and practices, including to commit it to the path of peace long endorsed by the international community. Moreover, we reiterate our grave concern at the lack of accountability for all the violations committed by Israel, which fuels a culture of impunity and destabilizes the situation on the ground, while diminishing the prospects for peace. Hence, we continue to call for international action, particularly by the Security Council, to ensure accountability for and a cessation of the violations. Israel must comply with its duties and responsibilities under international law. Mr. President, the solidarity of the international community with the just Palestinian cause must also be directed to all relevant efforts in support of the independence and sovereignty of the State of Palestine in all of the Palestinian territory occupied by Israel in 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital in accordance with the relevant resolutions, and to support the admission of Palestine to the United Nations as a full member state. Furthermore, considering the lack of significant progress in the Middle East peace process, which remains stalled despite decades of negotiations, during the 18th NAM Midterm Ministerial Conference held in April 2018 in Baku, in the Republic of Azerbaijan, the ministers of the movement stressed the urgent need for advancing a political horizon and credible peace process that is firmly based on relevant Security Council resolutions, the Madrid Terms of Reference, including the principle of land for peace, the Arab Peace Initiative, and the Quartet Roadmap. We support immediate and practical efforts in support of this objective for the ultimate achievement of a just solution and lasting peace. To conclude, the non-aligned movement reiterates on this important day its unwavering commitment to a just and comprehensive solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict, with the question of Palestine at its core, and to the immediate restoration of the inalienable rights of the heroic Palestinian people, including their right to self-determination and to their independent, contiguous, and viable state of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital, on the basis of pre-1967 borders, and a just solution for the plight of the Palestine refugees on the basis of General Assembly Resolution 194. It is such a just solution that will guarantee the peace that the international community and the Palestinian people have long searched for and should remain committed to in order to usher in a new era of peace and stability for the region. As we have said before, only a comprehensive solution to the question of Palestine will allow us to achieve the long sought-after peace in the Middle East region and to finally resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict as a whole. I thank you, Chairman.
Je remercie.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Henry Suarez, and I ask him to convey to His Excellency Mr. Nicolas Maduro, the President of Venezuela, the sincere thanks of the committee for the important statement made on behalf of the non-aligned movement.
Il me plaît.
I now have the pleasure of giving the floor to His Excellency Mr. Abdel Fattah al-Aziz, the Deputy Permanent Observer of the Organization to the United Nations, who will deliver a message on behalf of the Secretary General of the League of Arab States. Dear friend, you have the floor.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. سيد الرئيس اسمحوا لي.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, allow me to read you the message from His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Abul-Gate, the Secretary General of the League of Arab States, within the framework of this day of solidarity with the Palestinian people. The message now begins. His Excellency, the President of the the Committee for the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, today the United Nations is celebrating the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. This day was adopted by the General Assembly in 1977. It's a day that is part of the strong message provided by the international community, reiterating that the Palestinian question is a just question. It also reiterates the historic and natural rights of the Palestinian people to return to the houses that they were displaced from, and reaffirms their rights to self-determination and to have an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. This message restates the commitment of the international community to this people, that it should be free and that it should be able to enjoy its rights. The international community, above all the United Nations, has the responsibility for upholding these principles, especially in light of the attempted occupation that is being carried out. It also has to fight the unjust decisions taken by the current US administration, in particular the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and the transfer of the US embassy to Jerusalem. And also American support, the withdrawal of American support from UNRWA and other entities, and the closure of other organizations. Within ministerial meetings, the Arab League and high-level meetings have condemned these decisions, stating that they do not respect Arab rights or UN resolutions. This International Day, therefore, is important in outlining the threats that the Palestinian people face. We must spare no effort to have peace and also to uphold international law, international humanitarian law, and human rights. There are also the resolutions and the will of the international community, besides the Palestinian Liberation Authority, and other efforts are being maintained to counteract the racist actions against the Palestinian people and to ensure that they can have access to the holy sites and that displacement ends. The Israeli authorities are also trying to Judaicize Jerusalem. They are expelling people from the city and are trying to change the historic memory of the place and also to deform reality. All of this goes against the grain of international resolutions. By way of evidence, I have the right to nationality as adopted by or right to nationalism adopted by the Israeli authorities that discriminates against 2 million Palestinians. We also need a strong position from the international community, above all within the General Assembly and the Security Council. It's a question not just of ending the occupation and the lack of respect for international resolutions and for equality, but it's also a question of fighting against this operation, this settlement operation, which is illegal and carried out by Israel. It threatens any chance of achieving a two-state solution and gives rise to a new reality characterized by discrimination and racial discrimination. This goes against the grain of the various General Assembly resolutions. This means that we must exhort the members of the United Nations who have recognized the State of Israel, which they did within the borders of 1967. For those states that still haven't recognized the State of Palestine, we encourage them to recognize the State of Palestine as an independent state within the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as the capital. We reiterate the importance of having the provisions of the Fourth Geneva Convention implemented and also other international legal provisions, and upholding the principle of equality in international jurisdictions. With regard to the occupation, this must also be ended. We must end the violations and actions perpetrated by Israeli forces. We also need to set up important mechanisms to provide protection to the Palestinian people in the face of the occupation, and so that this people can enjoy its independence and its freedom, like the peoples of all free states. I therefore wish to restate that peace is the noble objective of Palestinians and of the international community, which is reflected in the international determination to have two states in line with the Arab Peace Initiative's vision. This remains, to date, since it was adopted in the 2002 Beirut summit, an important provision on the Palestinian question. Furthermore, Palestinian reconciliation remains an essential element in regulating inter-Palestinian affairs and facing the different challenges. The League of Arab States hopes that this reconciliation will happen in a final integrated way to end the division between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip forever. To this effect, the League of Arab States, with the support of the non-aligned movement and the Organization of Islamic Conference, is fighting any attempt to exacerbate the divisions between Palestinians. We see these attempts, for example, in the new resolution presented to the General Assembly of the United Nations, which includes amendments and a draft resolution to change international support for resolutions that were adopted over the years. These attempts also try to have a negative impact on the reality of the Palestinian people. We have the conviction that the international community represented by the member states will reject this attempt and will restate its commitment to international equality. The Palestinian people have kept their issue at the top of the international agenda 70 years after the Nakba, and it cannot give in to the politics of a fait accompli and of increasing pressure. This pressure cannot break its will. On the contrary, the Palestinian people is still waging its battle with force and determination, with heroism and with a resolute character. We wish to achieve freedom and independence and the support of the international community, which believes in the values of peace, equality and justice, so that Palestine and its people can take their rightful place among the international community. I hope that next year we will celebrate this day that we are celebrating with the implementation of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as a capital within the pre-1967 borders. We welcome the fair struggle of the Palestinian people and provide support and solidarity at international level on the Palestinian issue. This is the end of my statement.
I'd like to thank Mr. Majid Abdel Fattah Abdelaziz for his important statement, and I'd ask him to convey to His Excellency Monsieur Ahmed Aboul Ghaid, Secretary General of the League of Arab States, the sincere gratitude of this committee for his ongoing support for the activities of the committee. Thank you, sir. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to my sister, the permanent observer of the OIC, who will read the message from His Excellency Mr. Youssef bin Ahmad Al Uthaymeen, Secretary General of the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. You have the floor.
Thank you, Excellency, and I am honored to deliver the statement on behalf of the OIC Secretary General on this occasion. سعادة السفير شيخ نيانغ رئيس الجمعية اللجنة المعنية بممارسة
Your Excellency, Chair of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, all protocols observed, ladies and gentlemen. We reaffirm the sustained international solidarity with the Palestinian people, and as a token of the international community's commitment to their Palestinian people's legitimate rights. And the UN General Assembly adopted on 29th November 1977 the resolution for the annual observance of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. This came 3 decades after UN Resolution 181 to partition into 2 states the mandated Palestine. Whereas the first state exists, the second is yet to materialize. And the Palestinians continue to strive to exercise their right to self-determination and see their right established to establish their independent state within the borders of June 4, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital as a prerequisite for peace to prevail in the region. Today's meeting is an opportunity for all of us, as countries, as organizations, and as peoples, to take a sober reflection of the effects of the Israeli colonial settlement practices, apartheid policies, Judaization, and forced displacement of the Palestinian people. This should make us rethink our individual and collective positions and our responsibility to end Israeli occupation and achieve peace based on law and justice, an aspiration we all share. Ladies and gentlemen, we are commemorating this day at an extremely difficult moment for the Palestinian people and their cause. The Palestinians see no genuine political horizon because of the continuous violations by Israel, the occupying force of international relevant UN resolutions, with its ensuring commitments and obligations so far met. Worse even, the U.S. administration is taking positions and decisions that show its complete bias in favor of the occupying force, acting in breach of internationally recognized resolutions and departing from its previous role of mediator in the peace process. This has weakened the Palestinian people's hopes of ending their ordeal, caused the existing state of affairs to deteriorate, and created a climate of insecurity and tension in the entire region. These challenges have been compounded, making it incumbent on the international community to act effectively and in earnest, commensurately with the serious nature of the situation and in fulfillment of its political, legal, and moral responsibilities. The aim should be to entrench peace, security, and stability in the region while redressing the historical injustice to which the Palestinian people are victims, ensuring respect for and implementation of the UN resolutions, the principles of international law, and relevant international instruments. We call on members of the international community to ensure that their policies, positions, efforts, and role be built on their obligations to uphold the rule of law and justice and to promote peace and security. Indeed, there's a need for active and resolute engagement in a multilateral sponsorship for the political process within a specific time frame and with clear international instruments. The express aim is to make concrete progress toward this two-state solution and redress the historical injustice caused to the Palestinian people across ages. Ladies and gentlemen, we hold in high esteem and appreciation the Palestinian people, showing incredible resolve and sacrifice and unshaken belief in their just cause. The Palestinian people have remained steadfast on their land, standing up for their rights and making great strides thus far in making their case on the world stage. Yet, we call for greater international support and solidarity with the Palestinian people in their legitimate struggle. We also reiterate our support for the Palestinian leadership in its efforts to get the state of Palestine to exercise its legitimate right to join international organizations and be party to international instruments, thereby enhancing its political and legal status worldwide. In this connection, we note with appreciation UN General Assembly's decision to invest the state of Palestine with additional powers to preside over the G77 China group in 2019, which can only strengthen its right to obtain full UN membership. Ladies and gentlemen, I should like to conclude by reiterating the OIC's support for and solidarity with the Palestinian people in their struggle to achieve their inalienable national rights, including the right to return to self-determination and their right to establish their independent state within the borders of the 4th of June 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, and their right to find a just solution for Palestinian refugees in line with UN General Assembly Resolution 194. This is the end of my statement, sir. Thank you, sir. I thank the Deputy Permanent Observer for his statement, and we ask you to convey to the authorities of the OIC our appreciation for the clear collaboration between our entities. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to my sister, Her Excellency Madam Fatima Kiari Mohammed. She's the permanent observer of the African Union to the United Nations, and she will share with us a message from His Excellency Mr. Moussa Faki, who is chairperson of the African Union Commission. You have the floor, madam.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman.
I'm honored this morning to deliver the message of His Excellency Moussa Mohamed Faki, chairperson of the African Union Commission. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Today, the African people celebrate with their brothers and sisters in Palestine the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. The occasion marks the adoption of the General Assembly of Resolution 181 on November 29, 1947, partitioning the territory of Palestine into 2 states. The African Union follows closely the developments in Palestine and the Middle East region. The African Union's support to the Palestinian cause is intrinsically linked with the Africa-Arab Partnership. More fundamentally, it is premised on the values of freedom, justice, and humanitarian principles that Africa defends in international fora alongside all those striving to ensure that Palestine regains its right to exist as a key state in a region considered the cradle of humanity, religions, and prophets, a region that the world has the obligation to preserve. The African Union has consistently expressed concerns at the consequences of unilateral policies, actions, and provocations, including the illegal construction of settlements and the blockade and isolation of the Gaza Strip from the rest of the Palestinian territories. These practices represent a real threat to international peace and security in the region and undermine the spirit of the 1982 Arab Peace Initiative for a just and lasting solution to this long-standing conflict. The African Union continues to call on the international community to assume its responsibilities vis-à-vis the question of Palestine and the implementation of the UN resolutions adopted from 1948 to date to compel Israel to comply with international law. Today, more than ever before, there's a need for urgent and renewed efforts to find a just and lasting solution to the conflict based on the existence of 2 states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and harmony within the framework of the relevant African Union and United Nations pronouncements. The current situation calls for urgent action towards ending the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land. The Palestinian leadership, led by President Mahmoud Abbas, has always emphasized that it will continue to explore political and diplomatic efforts at all levels in order to maintain the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. Therefore, the international community, the Quartet Committee, the UN Security Council, and all regional and international organizations are called upon to request Israel to implement decisions and declarations taken thus far to promote peace and stability based on the two-state solution. Israel must also stop all violations of international human rights and humanitarian laws and adhere to them. The occupied Palestinian territories witnessed Israeli escalation in the political, economic, and social spheres as Israel hastened to announce the start of the implementation of a broader and heightened settlement in the occupied West Bank, targeting occupied East Jerusalem and its suburbs in particular. The Israeli government continues to violate international norms and standards by increasing the pace of illegal settlements. Israel's policy of building settlements in occupied territory is one of the core issues in the conflict. Illegal, under international law, settlements built on confiscated or stolen Palestinian land are one of the core justifications for building of the wall and the restriction of Palestinian movement within the West Bank. This contributes to forced displacement, severely limits Palestinian access to basic resources, including land and water, and perpetuates a system of segregation and structural inequality between Palestinians and Israelis. The African Union reiterates its commitment to support all efforts aiming at achieving a final solution for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict based on the international legitimacy and reject any incomplete and fragmental solutions such as temporary borders or the Jewishness of Israel. The African Union Commission will work tirelessly with the international community to ensure the establishment of an independent Palestinian state on the borders of June 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you.
Excellence.
I'd like to thank Her Excellency Madam Fatima Kiari Mohammed for this very important message delivered on behalf of the African Union Commission, which, in addition to being a valuable partner of our committee, continues to be mobilized in the quest for a just solution to the Palestinian question. Last but not least, it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Mark Lamont Hill, and I introduced him just now as an American citizen, journalist, and chronicler on CNN. He is freshly back from Palestine, returned this morning, and he's joining us to give us his perspective from the perspective of civil society. Mark, the floor is yours.
Mr. Secretary General, Chairman, Ambassadors, and Your Excellencies, good afternoon. It is with great honor and humility that I accept the opportunity to speak before you. As a scholar, as an activist, and as a citizen, I am profoundly interested in the plight of the Palestinian people, as well as the broader ethical, moral, and political implications of their struggle for freedom and justice, as well as equality. As such, this annual convening represents a critical intervention. It also represents a site of possibility. On the other hand, it shows considerable irony. As you well know, this year marks the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This declaration is produced out of the rubble and contradictions of World War II, and it was intended to offer a clear ethical and moral outline of the basic rights and freedoms to which all human beings, irrespective of race, religion, class, gender, or geography, are entitled. This declaration, of course, has been far from perfect, both in design and in execution. Too often we have framed human rights through the lens of the West. We viewed it through the gaze of colonialism and we have assessed them through the limited prism of our own experiences. Simply put, the powerful have too often attempted to universalize their own particular and local values. Still, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has offered us a flawed but functional starting point from which to articulate basic moral and ethical ambitions as global citizens. These ambitions have been particularly helpful when attempting to keep track of the vulnerable against the backdrop of imperialism, exploitative economic arrangements, white supremacy, patriarchy, and all the other entanglements of the modern nation state. For this reason, it is indeed ironic and sad that this year also marks the 70th anniversary of the Nakba, the great catastrophe in May 1948 that resulted in the expulsion, murder, and to date, permanent dislocation of more than 1 million Palestinians. For every minute that the global community has articulated a clear and lucid framework for human rights, the Palestinian people have been deprived of the most fundamental of them. While the Universal Declaration for Human Rights says that all people are, quote, born free and equal in dignity and rights, the Israeli nation-state continues to restrict freedom and undermine equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel, as well as those in the West Bank and Gaza. At the current moment, there are more than 60 Israeli laws that deny Palestinians access to full citizenship rights, simply because they're not Jewish. From housing to education to family reunification, it is clear that any freedoms naturally endowed to all human beings are actively being stripped away from Palestinians through Israeli statecraft. While human rights promises the right to life, liberty, and security of person, Palestinians continue to live under the threat of random violence by Israeli military and police, disproportionate violence within the West Bank and Gaza, unprompted violence in the face of peaceful protest, and misdirected violence by an Israeli state that systematically fails to distinguish between civilians and combatants. While the Universal Declaration for Human Rights protects us against torture and cruel and inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, Palestinians continue to be physically and psychologically tortured by the Israeli criminal justice system, a term I can only use with irony. As human rights groups around the world have noted, the use of solitary confinement constitutes a clear and indisputable form of torture. Yet in the West Bank, Palestinians are routinely subjected to solitary confinement and indefinite detention, often without any formal charges being filed. Last year, the Israeli Supreme Court ruled that physical torture in, quote, exceptional cases, including ticking time bomb situations, constitute acceptable means by which to engage in torture. Although these exceptions are themselves a violation of the absolute human right not to be tortured, Israeli security operates in practice in such a way that nearly all Palestinian cases are viewed as exceptional. Nearly every Palestinian is understood to be a potential terrorist, thereby making them susceptible to ticking time bomb investigation tactics at all times. As such, Israel's practices are routinely in clear violation of the UN's Convention on Torture, which was signed by Israel in 1986 and ratified in 1991. While the Declaration of Human Rights insists that no one be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile, Palestinians are routinely denied due process of law. West Bank Palestinians are regularly placed under administrative detention, a framework that allows them to be incarcerated for up to 6 months and can be extended after judicial review without being charged with a crime. The only thing needed for such outcomes is the ambiguous claim of a security threat, a claim used by the Israeli state at all times, at all costs, and for all reasons. Through this vagueness, Palestinians are routinely punished for their political views rather than any actual threat of violence. The Declaration of Human Rights insists that all humans are entitled to a, quote, fair and public hearing by an impartial tribunal. Israeli military courts, the exclusive adjudicator largely for West Bank residents, and in some cases Palestinian citizens of Israel, they have a conviction rate of more than 99%. That suggests that Palestinians are either more guilty than any other group in human history, or that the Israeli government is unwilling or incapable of offering fair and impartial trials for Palestinians. Declaration of Human Rights promises the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state, as well as the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to said country. It is impossible to travel throughout historic Palestine and not see the blatant restriction of movement between cities in the occupied Palestinian territories, as well as inside the state of Israel. Standing checkpoints, temporary or flying checkpoints, annexation walls, and other security barriers prevent Palestinians from moving freely, both within areas legally designated by the Israeli government and co-signed by the Palestinian Authority under the terms of Oslo. But also we see in Gaza the restriction of movement that is so severe that it literally defines life in the area. I promise you that I will not exhaust all of my time by enumerating every human rights violation perpetrated by the Israeli government. These are well known and have been well documented by every credible human rights organization in the world. Rather, I would like to speak to you about the urgency of the current moment. Forgive my thirst. I literally just got off of a flight from Palestine to come to address you this morning, and I was boycotting the Israeli water, so I was unable to quench my thirst. But thank you for your indulgence, or for indulging me, rather. As we speak, the conditions on the ground for Palestinian people are worsening. In recent decades, the Israeli government has moved further and further to the right, normalizing settler colonialism and its accompanying logics of denial, destruction, displacement, and death. Despite international condemnation, settlement expansion has continued. At the same time, home demolitions and state-enforced displacement continues to uproot Palestinian communities. For Gazans, the 11-year Israeli and Egyptian blockade by land, air, and sea has created the largest open-air prison in the world. With only 4% potable water, electricity access that is limited to 4 hours per day, 50% unemployment, and the looming threat of Israeli bombs, Gaza continues to constitute one of the most pressing humanitarian crises of the current moment. In the West Bank, conditions are not much better. Unemployment is generally around 18%, with frequent loss of income due to Israeli military closures, making it impossible for Palestinian workers to get access to jobs. Settlements and the extra land allocated for them, as well as closed military zones and other restrictions, make it impossible for Palestinian towns to grow. And in the midst of it all, Prime Minister Netanyahu's administration has become increasingly indifferent to critique, censure, or even scorn from the international community for its practices. Perhaps the most glaring example of this indifference, as well as the urgency of the current moment, is the recently passed nation-state law. Through this basic law, the Israeli state has officially rejected Arabic as an official state language. It has described settlement expansion both inside and outside of the Green Line as a national value, and it has reinforced the fact that Israel is not a state of all of its citizens. As an American, I am embarrassed that my tax dollars contribute to this reality. I am frustrated that no American president since the start of the occupation has taken a principled and actionable position in defense of Palestinian rights. And I am saddened, though not surprised, that President Trump's administration has further emboldened Israel's behavior through its recent actions. In May of this year, President Trump officially moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, which he recognized as the undivided capital of Israel. This choice not only flew in the face of international law and precedent, but also constituted a powerful provocation and a diplomatic death blow. In late August, President Trump then permanently reneged on America's commitment to funding UNRWA, a move that now leaves millions of Palestinian refugees in medical, economic, and educational peril. Moreover, the move serves as a political strong-arm tactic, whereby the United States is unilaterally attempting to resolve, through the Trump administration, the final status of Palestinian refugees. While President Trump's policies have been the most dramatic, it is important that I stress to you, to reiterate to you, that they are not wildly out of step with American policy. Cuts to UNRWA is an idea that has been raised in Washington for years, dating back at least to the George W. Bush administration. President Trump's decision to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem caused enormous controversy, but he was merely implementing a bipartisan law Congress passed in 1995. And in so doing, he executed what has already been official United States policy and the fulfillment of a promise made by every United States president and presidential candidate, Democrat and Republican, for a very long time. With regard to the question of Palestine, Donald Trump is not an exception to American policy. Rather, Donald Trump is a more transparent and aggressive iteration of it. As I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, the words offered today by everyone in this room are a necessary component of our resistance efforts. We need powerful, counterintuitive, dangerous, and courageous words. But we must also offer more than just words. Words will not stop the village of Khan al-Ahmar with its makeshift schools created by local Bedouin villagers. Words will not stop them from being demolished in violation of the Fourth Geneva Conventions. Words will not stop poets like Darin Tetur from being caged in Israeli jails, for having the audacity to speak the truth about the conditions of struggle on her own personal Facebook page. Words will not stop peaceful protesters in Gaza from being killed as they fight for freedom against Israel's still undeclared borders. Regarding the question of Palestine, beyond words, we must ask the question, what does justice require? To truly engage in acts of solidarity, we must make our words flesh. Our solidarity must be more than a noun. Our solidarity must become a verb. As a Black American, my understanding of action and solidarity action is rooted in our own tradition of struggle. As Black Americans resisted slavery, as well as Jim Crow laws that transformed us from a slave state to an apartheid state, we did so through multiple tactics and strategies. It is this array of tactics that I appeal to as I advocate for concrete action from all of us in this room. Solidarity from the international community demands that we embrace boycotts, divestment, and sanctions as a critical means by which to hold Israel accountable for its treatment of Palestinian people. This movement, which emerges out of the overwhelming majority of Palestinian civil society, offers a nonviolent means by which to demand a return to the pre-67 borders, full rights for Palestinian citizens, and the right of return as dictated by international law. Solidarity demands that we no longer allow politicians or political parties to remain silent on the question of Palestine. We can no longer, in particular, allow the political left to remain radical or even progressive on every issue, from the environment to war to the economy, to remain progressive on every issue except for Palestine. Contrary to Western mythology, Black resistance to American apartheid did not come purely through Gandhian nonviolence. Rather, slave revolts and self-defense and tactics otherwise divergent from Dr. King or Mahatma Gandhi were equally important to preserving safety and attaining freedom. We must allow, if we are to operate in true solidarity with Palestinian people, we must allow the Palestinian people the same range of opportunity and political possibility. If we are standing in solidarity with Palestinian people, we must recognize the right of an occupied people to defend itself. We must prioritize peace. But we must not romanticize or fetishize it. We must advocate and promote nonviolence at every opportunity, but we cannot endorse a narrow politics of respectability that shames Palestinians for resisting, for refusing to do nothing in the face of state violence and ethnic cleansing. At the current moment, there is little reason for optimism. Optimism, of course, is the belief that good will inevitably prevail over evil, that justice will inevitably win out. In the course of human history, and certainly even in the course of the United Nations, there is no evidence of such a proposition. Optimism is unsophisticated. Optimism is immature. Optimism is what my students have when they take examinations that they did not study for. Some become quite religious at that time. But regardless of their strategies of optimism, the outcome is far from guaranteed or even likely. What I'm challenging us to do in the spirit of solidarity is not to embrace optimism, but to embrace radical hope. Radical hope is a belief that despite the odds, despite the considerable measures against justice and peace, despite the legacy of hatred and imperialism and white supremacy and patriarchy and homophobia, despite these systems of power that have normalized settler colonialism, despite these structures, we can still win, we can still prevail. One motivation for my hope in the liberation and ultimate self-determination of the Palestinian people comes in August of 2014. Black Americans were in Ferguson, Missouri, in the Midwest of the United States, protesting the death of a young man named Michael Brown, an unarmed African-American male who had been killed by a law enforcement agent. And as we protested, I saw two things that provided hope for the Palestinian struggle. One was that for the first time in my entire life of activism, I saw a sea of Palestinian people. I saw a sea of Palestinian flags in the crowd saying that we must form a solidarity project. We must struggle together in order to resist, because state violence in the United States and state violence in Brazil and state violence in Syria and state violence in Egypt and state violence in South Africa and state violence in Palestine are all of the same sort. And we finally understood that we must work together and not turn on each other, but instead turn to each other. And later that night, when the police began to tear gas us, Maryam Barghouti tweeted us from Ramallah. She, along with other Palestinian youth activists, told us that the tear gas that we were experiencing was only temporary. They gave us tips for how to wash our eyes out. They told us how to make gas masks out of T-shirts. They gave us permission to think and dream beyond our local conditions by giving us a transnational or a global solidarity project. And from those tweets and social media messages, we began then to organize together. We brought a delegation of black activists to Palestine, and we saw the connections between the police in New York City, who were being trained by Israeli soldiers, and the type of policing we were experiencing in New York City. We began to see relationships of resistance, and we began to build and struggle and organize together. That spirit of solidarity, a solidarity that is bound up not just in ideology, but in action, is the way out. So as we stand here on the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the tragic commemoration of the Nakba, we have an opportunity to not just offer solidarity in words, but to commit to political action, grassroots action, local action, and international action that will give us what justice requires. And that is a free Palestine from the river to the sea. Thank you for your time.
I very sincerely thank Mr. Mark Lamont Hill for the power and the eloquence of his statement, which shows his firm commitment to promoting and defending the Palestinian cause. And in doing that, it also offers us an outside view which feeds our own considerations. Furthermore, I'd like to take this opportunity to hail the action of civil society organizations. They continue to work around the world to find fair and definitive solutions to the Palestinian question.
Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before I move on to some housekeeping, which will mark the end of our meeting, I would like to announce that the committee has received messages of support and solidarity from a number of heads of state and government, from ministers of foreign affairs and members of government and international organizations. I'd like to read the list of dignitaries who have sent messages in the order in which these messages have been received. We've received messages from the following heads of state: Sri Lanka, Tunisia, Laos, Senegal, Iraq, Mali, Jordan, Qatar, Morocco, Turkey, Brunei Darussalam, China, Lebanon, the United Arab Emirates, Iran, Nicaragua, Sudan, Burkina Faso, the Russian Federation, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Zimbabwe. We have received messages from the following heads of government: Malta, Bangladesh, India, Thailand, Mauritius, and Malaysia. The committee has also received messages from the following ministers of foreign affairs: Argentina, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Japan, Ecuador, Cuba, Kazakhstan, Namibia, and Bahrain. We have received messages from the following governments: Guyana, and the committee has also received messages from the following organizations: the Non-Aligned Movement, the European Union, the League of Arab States, the African Union, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. All of the messages that we have received have been published on the website on the Palestinian question, managed by the Division for the Rights of Palestinian People, unispal.un.org. On behalf of the committee, I warmly thank the heads of state and government, foreign affairs ministers, governments and organizations that I have just mentioned for their tireless efforts to end the occupation of the Palestinian territories that has lasted more than 51 years now, and to achieve a holistic, fair and sustainable settlement to the Palestinian question. Ladies and gentlemen, before closing this meeting, I wish to thank all of the people who have contributed to the success of this event, in particular members of the Division of the Rights of Palestinians, of the Department of the General Assembly and Conference Management, the Department of Information, and the Office of Central Support Services, without forgetting, of course, the security personnel. As you know, tomorrow, on the 29th of November at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the General Assembly will begin its debate on the agenda item called the Palestinian Question. As chair of the committee, I will there present the draft resolutions on this agenda item, and our rapporteur, my friend Ambassador Carmelo Iguanes, the permanent representative of Malta, will present the annual report to the committee. I should like to take this opportunity to encourage Member States to play an active role in these sessions and encourage them to reiterate their support for Palestine by voting en masse in favour of these draft resolutions, whose adoption is scheduled for the 30th of November 2018. Still thinking about activities that demonstrate our solidarity with the Palestinian people, I invite you to the opening of an exhibition tomorrow afternoon, an exhibition entitled Non-Realized Rights, Promises Not Kept, 70 years after the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Palestinian Nakba. That is the name of the exhibition. These photographs are evidence of the implacable realities experienced by Palestinians, but they also demonstrate the resilience, in particular in preserving Palestine's rich heritage. I hope to see many of you at the opening of this exhibition, which should take place at 6:30 in the General Assembly building and will be followed by a reception. I cannot close without hailing the presence among us of a number of representatives of Palestinian civil society who play an active role in our activities, in particular in the consultations that will take place this afternoon at 3 o'clock in conference room number 8. I wish to warmly thank you. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.